Alright, so my last In Memoriam video, I had done what ultimately turned out, much to my joy, somewhat prematurely when it comes to Giant Bomb, not so much to Polygon. Um, as I put a note in the, remember to put a note in front of that video before it went live, the version that went live. Giant Bomb got bought by its employees and is returned from the grave. The In Memoriam video I'm doing this week is not that. It can't be the case for this. And that is because I'm doing an In Memoriam video for a professional wrestler who I admit I did not get the opportunity to see perform live when he was alive, but who is in part one of, I would say, the three wrestlers who's responsible for getting me back into professional wrestling in high school, and that is Sabu. A little bit of backstory. Back when I was in high school, further back, while watching wrestling in middle school, I watched, some bad matches in WCW programming. I remember seeing some particularly, let's just call them crap, mounted 10 punches on the turnbuckle by some tag team. This is a combination of the punches weren't even in the same gosh darn zip code, and this is probably to a certain degree a fair bit of a fault of the camera production at WCW more than the fault of the wrestlers in question, but it soured me on wrestling for a while. It cinched in what everyone at school was saying is, oh, wrestling is fake, and I walked away from it for a while. Fast forward, as I'm getting into high school, I'm volunteering at the library, and one of the books I shelve in the biography section is Mick Foley's first memoir, Have a Nice Day, A Tale of Blood and Sweat Socks, which, if you've seen the back cover of that book, you know that it includes a full chronicle of, at that time, the various injuries that Mick Foley has suffered over the course of his career. And that caught my attention, in particularly certain things like innumerable thumbtacks, for example. Okay, how does that happen? So I end up checking out the book and reading it cover to cover. And it changes my perception of professional wrestling dramatically. Because Mick, in that biography, goes very heavily into the craft of wrestling and the work that it takes to learn how to be a wrestler, and came across that, yes, ideally, when you're doing a wrestling match, you're not trying to injure each other, and the condition and the conclusion of the match is determined in advance. So in that respect, yes, it is fake, but it does not mean that there is not a lot of risk of injury that is involved, and does not mean that there is a lot of hard work that goes into making each match happen. And then I understood, because also at this time, I was getting very much into martial arts film. And so it all clicked to me in terms of what wrestling was to me. And wrestling, it was like a martial arts movie, like stage combat in theater on the round. It's martial arts film theater on the round. You cannot, without the ability to necessarily in the same way rely on camera perspectives and that sort of thing to hide what you're doing. And I got it. It made sense. Wrestling is, in a way, Shakespeare. Not in the same level of dialogue, but kind of. So, as the time has revelation, okay, I'm going to start getting back into wrestling again. Another thing is happening around the same time, and that is the rise of peer-to-peer file swapping software. Stuff like, first Napster, and then later Kazaa, and similar services from that, eDonkey, that sort of thing. None of those services, you use those now. They are, even at the time it very quickly came out that they are great avenues for the propagation of spyware and malware and viruses and all that other sort of stuff. So but this is the heyday. So like, okay, I'm going to look for old wrestling matches on these peer-to-peer services, particularly since I had a laptop, which I took to school to take notes and stuck around after school, and my high school had a very good high-speed internet connection that when I'm late in the day, waiting for the activity bus or what have you, I could just use that to download games and this video on peer-to-peer file swapping services very fast. And so this got me this let me do a couple things. One was downloading legally the game, the booking simulator, Total Extreme Warfare, and two, looking for wrestling matches on websites and on these file swapping services. Because at this time, because of the limitations of larger file swapping and the fact that high-speed internet was at that time not very widespread, and what was more widespread was stuff like DSL, which still would take a long time to download something, meant that you didn't put out, for file swapping, the entire pay-per-view. You wouldn't put out night one of a particular year's G1 climax as one big thing. Instead, it was customary to chop this up into smaller video files for often focusing on particular matches. So instead of this night of the G1 climax, it might just be Prince Devitt versus Shinsuke Nakamura. And this is actually how sites like Death Valley Driver Video Review got started, or ended up kind of like getting a lot more widespread, is because they had video swapping forums, in addition to discussing match results and that sort of thing. Yes, if you're saying, wait a minute, Tony Khan hung out on the Death Valley Driver Video Review forums, and Tony Khan also played Extreme Warfare Revenge. Yes, Tony Khan also is a child of incredibly wealthy people, so he has the money to afford to take his booking simulator video game experience and try and translate that into real life with, honestly, moderate success. A lot better than I did. I would have. In any case. So, with that, let's come back into the Mick Foley thing, because I read Mick Foley's memoirs, and I read some stuff, like I picked up some names, and in terms of other wrestlers and events. Like, I went and looked for Mick Foley's King of Deathmatch tournament finals. Was able to find out without too much issue. And there are a couple of avenues I could have gone from there. One of the things I could search for is WCW, Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, Sting, that sort of thing. I didn't. Instead, there's a chunk in the middle of the book where Mick talks about his time in ECW. And I went, okay, I'm going to search for that. I'm going to go search for ECW. And one of the first matches that came up on the search results was from ECW's first pay-per-view, Barely Legal, Sabu versus Taz. Not actually the main title match with Raven versus Terry Funk or anything like that, but that match is like in the top results. Lots of people sharing it. Like, okay, this will probably download fairly quickly. I'll download that and watch it. And I did. And my high school age mind was blown. Because ECW was in so many respects far different from anything that I'd seen previously. The production was much more raw than Raw, or WWE Raw, that is. With the lighting and the fixed camera positions and that sort of thing of the ECW arena. It was much more gritty in that respect. And also you had the audience cussing. Can't do that on TV. Like the big chance of, let's see here, I'm about 10 minutes in, I can cuss now. The big holy shit chance and that sort of thing. In fact, my introduction to the ECW Holy Shit Chat and truly hearing it. Mick talks about it, but it's something else when you're watching a wrestling event and you hear the audience begin to chant. And of course, Joey Styles and commentary, but all of that was the framing that around the honestly kind of piece of art that was Taz versus Sabu. And Sabu was doing things that I'd never seen anyone do before, that nobody had done in the WCW matches that I'd watched at my friend's house. I think also when I was watching WCW was in the Bill Watts era too, so you can't do the top rope moves, the springboard leg drop, the triple jump moonsault, the springboard leg drop on the top rope, the tope suicida. None of those things were all of those off the table, and instead you had Sabu like doing all this stuff, putting Taz to the table, everything in that match. And it, even with hindsight, like it's like having seen other spot fests in wrestling matches, other matches where you have the performer doing all sorts of crazy stuff, doing and lots of it in a row, like shooting star presses, like 3 shooting star presses in a row, and the person kicks out. All that sort of thing. Sabu was doing incredibly profoundly risky moves, dangerous moves, and in some cases, effing up, and having learned later, sometimes on purpose, so that when the move lands, it has more impact. And conveying this narrative of getting across that Sabu is a wrestler with ring persona, is someone who will do absolutely anything it takes to win and put himself on the line to do it, while also coming across with Taz's character as someone who, while he's staying grounded and focusing on grappling and that sort of thing, not doing grappling as rest holds, but as someone who, like, okay, like these dynamics of these two mixing styles where Taz wins if he can tie Sabu down and keep him from moving, and Sabu, like, as long as if Sabu's in motion, he is in the power in the power in this match, and all of that, but combined with that, while say something like Sabu versus the Big Show or Sabu versus some other monster, Sabu could easily run rings around that person. Taz is still a very quick, nimble, and mobile person. He just doesn't do top rope stuff. And all of that made for a match that told a story very well. I didn't quite get it at the time. I was stunned and held kind of in my seat after school watching or when I got home watching the moves in question. But the narrative that was being done in the ring there by those two men was extraordinary. And I may not have understood it, but I kind of got it. And that hooked me in. It helped for that match that Joey Styles does a good job for, because this was ECW's first pay-per-view and there'd be potential viewers who wouldn't have been watching their TV programming. Joey Styles did a good job of getting across the history these two wrestlers have, leading into the match itself, and the video in question did not stop when the bell rang. It stuck around to let me hear Taz's promo after the match, and then to hear Sabu blow him off when Taz says that I'm going to accept a rematch at any time. That was great. And that got across everything I, as a viewer, needed about wrestling. For it to click with me, this is what I'm looking for. But then from there, I actually watch more wrestling and understand the importance. I mean, actually, having a promo in that match And in that video, the fact that we have the promo from Taz and no promo at all from Sabu. So just some general rantings from Fonzie, but otherwise no promo at all from Sabu. It changed. It made me understand like the whole picture to a respect, and it got me to then when I went back to watch, try to find opportunities when I could to watch current wrestling. I got it, and I still I didn't quite have the full appreciation of what makes good wrestling. I still end up like when I started like watching indie matches and like Ring of Honor and that sort of thing. Like I still kind of popped at the well crafted artisanal matches, so to speak, of your Samoa Joe versus Kenta Kobashi, as much as at the ludicrous, over-the-top 6-man insane spot fests where you can barely keep track of what's going on in the match in general, whether in the ring or outside. But the fact that the match I came in on was Sabu versus Taz, and what they did there, I think did more to help kind of keep me to hang on to wrestling and stick with it than if I'd instead gotten a Public Enemy match or a match with New Jack, or even if I'd gotten the Tommy Dreamer match with the chair shot heard around the world, I don't think it would have hit with me quite the same way as getting that Taz versus Sabu match. So I'm now in a spot where like learning that Sabu had passed as like I'm recording this on May 13th. I learned about Sabu's passing yesterday. Coming out is like, I'm not going to say that everyone who got me into wrestling is out of it, either due to retirement by injury or having passed now, because there are other wrestlers who I came across and discovered who helped keep me going and keep that flame alive. Some of those have still also retired. The American Dragon Bryan Danielson, but also like watching Japanese wrestling and seeing Shinsuke Nakamura matches on Death Valley Driver Video Review, or going to the indie circuit and seeing Samoa Joe matches, Punk matches, and then starting to see some of these guys in the present day through NXT or elsewhere, like Tomasino Ciampa, or like seeing for the new generation, after that, MJF. It says a lot, and I will say, I appreciate that our understanding of concussions has improved to such a way that hopefully we have less wrestlers doing quite the same level of, let's just say, stupid shit that Sabu did in the ring. But I still need to, I have to acknowledge that I wouldn't be willing to give an MJF promo, an MJF match, wouldn't willing to give a Kenny Omega match a time of day necessarily, if it wasn't for seeing Sabu in the ring. And that match made me a lifelong fan of Taz and of Sabu. And any wrestler who tries to pursue the vibe of Taz, whether it's Samoa Joe, whether it's Hook, or anyone who tries to, perhaps in a way that is viewed towards having a career in the long term, like a term who tries to seek to not emulate, but pay tribute to the legacy of Sabu will be someone that I'm willing to give time to. So, I guess as I was saying, thank you very much, Sabu. I appreciate all that you have done. And I would not have given my local indie wrestling promotions the time or money that I have were it not for you.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Tossing me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.